So what makes the best beginner bike, and why is that the CB300R? Just kidding, sort of, kind of. There's a lot of great beginner bikes. Welcome back to Remimoto. Today we are talking about beginner bikes and my thoughts as somebody who has progressed through that journey very recently on a modern bike. So let's get into it. Number one, weight. Do not buy a heavy bike for your first bike. Don't do it. Don't go from the rider class to a Road Glide or an Indian Super Chief or a GS 1250. Don't do it. Get a lighter bike. Get something that if it's starting to tip over, you can put a foot down and just hold it. Yeah, that might be a Softail, a Harley Softail. That might be a BMW, mid-size adventure bike even. And the comfort level of a smaller, lighter bike with reasonable power, doesn't need a bunch of power, is that your screw-ups have very minimal consequences. You're still aware you did them. Oh, there we go. I'm looking right into the bright sun here. The consequences for those screw-ups, much smaller, much smaller. And I can't overstate enough how many times you're going to make little screw-ups as a beginner. The next thing I would say is don't go crazy on the power. You don't have to do what I did and buy a really minimal power bike. I was not buying specifically a minimal power bike, but you don't want to buy a bike where the throttle scares you. This controlled throttle, this ability to learn to manipulate that throttle very carefully is important. It's a skill you have to learn, and you have to learn when it's going to go wrong and avoid that. The other thing is height. And I don't think height is as big a deal as people make it out to be, but there's this initial learning curve when you have a taller bike that if your bike is tall enough, you cannot just flat foot or at least get a good chunk of your feet down on both feet. There's this learning curve of learning, I need to plan ahead for this stop and be ready. I need to be ready in that emergency stop to put a foot down, which means you've got to make sure the bike leans one way or the other and that you know which way that's going to be. Now, something I think that doesn't get talked about, that should, that is a mitigating factor to all of that last whole section. You can sit down on a Harley Softail, on most of them, and just balance. Just sit there. I have sat there in the showroom balancing that bike with my feet off the ground on the pegs until I got bored. And I am not a particularly great balancer. I'm not bad, but my sense of balance is okay. But I'm not some gymnast or something. But the bikes are heavy, lower center of gravity, with big fat tires. You can sit there and balance. So in the grand scheme of things, compared to a sportier bike, they are more stable. When you're cruising down the road on the highway for the first few times, more stable. That comfort factor of that definitely plays a role. So I'm not going to tell you that a Harley Softail is not a good beginner bike. A Harley Sportster, not an S, just an old Evo Sportster. Decent beginner bikes. Now, I would not do a forwards control bike. I would do a mids control bike because you're more prepared to put a foot down in an emergency if you screw up, because your screw-ups are going to happen at low speed. They're going to happen in the parking lot. They're going to happen at 5 miles an hour and under more often than 50 miles an hour and up. Screwing up at 50 miles an hour is either you're going to have a real accident or it's a non-event. And obviously, there's running wide in corners, there's gravel and all that, but that's less of a beginner mistake and more of a speed mistake. That's something you just need to stop doing. You need to pay attention to your speed. So, have fun, stay safe, enjoy the ride, guys.